Do you have a story from your life that you're embarrassed to admit? Well, you see, I'm not just talking about like the stories where you're embarrassed to admit, but actually secretly you kind of want to because you know they're hilarious, right? You're like, oh, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I'm going to go ahead and make a fool of myself, share it anyway, right? No, I'm not talking about those stories. We all have those stories. I'm talking about the stories that honestly we're a little bit more ashamed to admit, that we don't want others to know about. In fact, these stories, these habits would just be much easier to sweep under the rug, suppress it as much as possible, and just ignore it and not address it. You have those stories? I think the church has those stories too. The local church has plenty of stories and habits from its entire history, but also what it does today that we just sweep under the rug, we suppress, we ignore, because we all know what the reality of that situation is, but it's the elephant in the room. There's a number of those things that the church has done and continues to do, but there's one in particular that we get to talk about this morning, and it's this. The church can be really bad at serving the poor. The church can be really bad at serving the poor. We're in our 4th week of a 7-week-long series called Lost Cause. This was really launched after Easter because when Jesus rose from the dead, he unleashed his apostles out onto the greatest mission of all time, to find the lost. The lost cause is the cause for the lost, to find those who don't know Jesus and witness to them about our experiences, inviting them to come and see what God is doing so that they might place their salvation in him. So in week 1, we talked all about evangelism, what it means to share our stories, to invite them to come and see what God's doing here. 2nd week, we talked about discipleship, what it means to invite people into our faith journeys and to walk alongside each other as we pursue Jesus. And then last week, we talked about living a faith that's aligned with our actual lives, right? It's one thing to tell people to come and see Jesus and to disciple them, but we got to make sure we live it out, right? It amplifies our witness. So if you've missed any of those sermons you want to catch up, you can scan the QR code on like the black digital Connect card. It brings you to a number of links. You can find our podcast. You can subscribe. You can do all that so you never miss a beat, even over your summers, okay? So you can do that. But today, we're talking about another portion, another aspect of Christ's mission that he sends us out on. In fact, that's really mandated as God's commands for all of his followers to do, and it is to serve and love the poor. And it is one that I think the church doesn't always do the best job at, despite there being so much biblical evidence for. Like, let's just name a couple of references. Let's just read some scripture references that really hone in on this importance for why we need to be kind and serve the poor, those who are less fortunate than us. Proverbs 19:17. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they've done. Or Deuteronomy 15:7-8. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his needs, whatever it may be. Proverbs 22:9 says, a generous person will be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. Proverbs 31:8-9, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Jesus says in Luke 14:13-14, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Or Acts 2:44-45, as it was describing the early church community, they said all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And lastly, and perhaps one of the most hard-hitting, is James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And I mean, that's just scratching the surface. You look at everything that Jesus does in his own life and ministry, he's constantly with the disenfranchised, with the poor, serving them providing for their needs. It is clear that we too must need to do the same thing. But when we ask ourselves, when was the last time we served someone in need? When was the last time we fed someone who was hungry, or we gave shelter to someone who needed it, or we gave clothes to someone who needed it, where we gave money to the poor, or we fought for injustice, invited an outcast to be a part of our party or our friend group, Like perhaps there's no other command in Scripture that we all know so well, but don't practice. Man, and if I can be honest, I have a hard time even thinking about a time when I exercised that radical compassion to those in need. Truly. And I think one of the reasons why this is so hard for not just us to do, but for the Big C Church, for all Christians to do, is because it's so easy for us to view religion, and even Christianity as a whole, as something that is self-serving rather than something that is self-giving. So if you have a Bible, turn with me to Isaiah chapter 58. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. If you either have that Bible or if you want to open up a Bible app, you can read along with us. This is just a great way for you to learn where to access your scriptures and everything. So Isaiah 58 comes from this huge book of the Bible called Isaiah, go figure. Isaiah is one of the prophets of the Old Testament, and prophets were sent out to be basically God's voice to the people. They were often giving God's word, God's commands to God's people who were often living in sin, who were completely disobeying him left and right. So the prophets are just trying to nudge God's people back to wholesome, righteous living as God commanded. And I think this passage of God using Isaiah to call out his people even 2,800 years ago still somehow speaks to us today. So let's read God's words to his people Israel through the prophet Isaiah, beginning in verse 1. Shout with the voice of a trumpet blast. Shout aloud and don't be timid. Tell my people Israel of their sins. Yet they act so pious. They come to the temple every day and seem delighted to learn all about me. They act like a righteous nation that would never abandon the laws of its God. They ask me to take action on their behalf, pretending they want to be near me. We have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? We have been very hard on ourselves and you don't even notice it. I will tell you why, I, God, respond. It's because you are fasting to please yourselves. Even while you fast, you keep oppressing your workers. What good is fasting when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me. You humble yourselves by going through the motions of penance, bowing your heads like reeds bending in the wind. You dress in burlap and cover yourselves with ashes. Is this what you call fasting? Do you really think this will please the Lord? All right, let's pause there at verse 5 before we finish out the rest of the chapter. So, to recap so far, God's calling out his people because they act like they're pious, righteous, and good followers of God. They try to follow all of his laws. They pray for God to take action. They're doing all the religious stuff the religious people are supposed to do. And the specific action they're taking here is fasting. So they're abstaining from food for long periods of time to deprive themselves of physical nourishment, to exhibit their dedication to the Lord to provide for all their needs. We don't fast in the local church much today. If anything, we use it as a diet trend, right? Which is so not what God originally intended the spiritual discipline to be. But when you look at this particular context, they're fasting, they're doing all the right stuff, but God doesn't answer their prayers because they're doing it all for the wrong reasons. They're trying to manipulate God through their pseudo-piety, through their fake righteousness, so to speak. And perhaps we all know too well the tendency for us to live pseudo-pious lives in the church, right? Just having this desire to go through the motions of the Christian faith. Maybe we read our Bibles, maybe we pray to the Lord, maybe we come to church, maybe we try not to cuss. We do all the right things that righteous people should do, and we ask God to bless us, and all those things are good, but perhaps there's something missing in our religious observance that might actually be hindering God pouring his blessing out upon us, just like God's people. In light of them trying to do all of this fasting, right, trying to please the Lord, here's what God says in verse 6. No, this is the kind of fasting I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned. Lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let the oppressed go free and remove the chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them, and do not hide from relatives who need your help. Then your salvation will come like the dawn, and your wounds will quickly heal. Your godliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then when you call, the Lord will answer. Yes, I am here, he will quickly reply. Remove the heavy yoke of oppression. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry. Help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities. Then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes. So the Israelites were asking for God's blessing, all while they were actively ignoring the needs of the poor. And in fact, they even participated in and perpetuated in the oppression of the poor. Therefore, God would not bless them until their religious observance was no longer self-seeking, but self-giving. Where instead of fasting and eating less for religious observance, they were to share their extra food to the poor. Instead of making others work harder under them while they enjoyed their Sabbath rest from work, they actually were to lighten the burden of those that they employed. Instead of making others work harder for them, I read that line already. Instead of buying expensive clothes, they were to give clothes to those who needed them, right? To not turn a blind eye to unjust practices and systems, but actually fight to set the oppressed free, to liberate them. Which also applies to us. But I said a couple of buzzwords, didn't I? Oppression, systemic oppression, injustice, liberation. Oh, Jake, you're getting a little too political here, aren't you? Right? Because those are words that are often associated with political ideologies that, especially in our modern day climate, there's just so many debates about how we should go about fighting for the poor, how to set captives free and liberation and all those things. Well, hear me. Fighting against unjust systems was a spiritual thing way before it was a political thing. It was something commanded by God well before America's current political ideologies were even considered. In fact, liberal politics originally had its roots way back in the day to liberal theology, specifically in Christians who were fighting so hard to liberate people from oppressive systems that keep them stuck in poverty. That was its root. And so far, it has gotten so far off of what God has commanded his people to actually do. Because it's gotten tainted and screwed up from just God's simple commands for his people to provide for those in need. So when we read these commands from God to care for the poor, for the less advantaged than us, we cannot read it through modern political lenses, okay? We have to read it through how God would want us to do so. Because this is something he commands us as his people to do, okay? And what we learned from Isaiah is, from God's perspective, religious observance and social righteousness go hand in hand. Faithful followership of God and extending compassion to those outside this place go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. James 2:14-17 says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." And we read that passage as if it says, if you say you pray, then actually pray. Right? If you say you do this and actually do it, like you live out what you preach. But what James is saying, no matter what our religious observance is, there's something about providing for those who are less, who have less than us. is directly in hand with faithful followership of Jesus. Or even 1 John 3:17 says, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? See, I think one of the reasons why churches can be so bad at serving the poor is because they focus so much on what happens in here that we turn a blind eye to what's happening out there. So we just sweep it under the rug, this rug actually, and ignore it. But religious observance and social righteousness go hand in hand. But I actually think that there's another end of the spectrum here. And I actually think a lot of churches and Christians fall in this camp. Because I think, especially for a lot of us here in this room, we want to serve the poor. We want to be kind. We want to be compassionate, right? We want to participate in these commands that Jesus and Scripture tells us to do, right? But instead of being villainous and heinous and self-seeking, we're just ignorant. And we just don't know what to do. Right? And there can just be a number of reasons for that. Maybe we think we just don't have the time to serve those in need. Maybe we don't think we actually have the money or the skills, or you think you have to have a social work degree to do anything of lasting value. You know, ever been there? Or maybe we're just afraid of interacting with people who are different from us. Right? There are so many things that get in the way. We truly maybe have that desire, but we just don't know how. And one of the things that I personally wrestle with, especially when it comes to providing for the poor, is I don't just want to do a quick Band-Aid fix, right? I want to participate in something that brings about long-term solutions, you know? That really equips people to live a life of sustainability. And maybe you've heard this phrase before, right? Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime, right? Or as Ron Swanson says, fishing's not that hard. He should just figure it out, right? Parks and Recreation reference for anybody who missed it. Go watch it. It's a great show. You see, this phrase, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime, often gets quoted with the debate of handing out things for daily provisions versus breaking systems that hold people down for generations in poverty, right, and trying to find more of these long-term solutions where they can sustain themselves. And it often gets quoted in a way where obviously the better solution is to provide a long-term solution. Right? Why give someone food for one day when you can teach them how to get their own food? Why give someone money when you can teach them how to get and maintain a job? Why give them anything at all that helps in the short term when you can do something that helps them sustain themselves for the long term, right? Obviously, the latter is an amazing goal, but here's the problem. As great as teaching a man how to fish is, it assumes you know how to teach him in the first place. Have you ever had a professor or a boss or a teacher, when they taught the content, they just assumed you knew it already? Those teachers are the worst, aren't they? Why don't you just know it, right? This professor who's lived in this content for his entire career just expects you to know how to do it. The same comes for teaching long-term sustainability with those in poverty. You see, I am all for doing everything we can to try to break these systemic poverty issues, right, by teaching people how to fish, provide themselves for the long term. It's just really, 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 really hard to do. Because people in poverty just view the world from an entirely different perspective. And often, because of that, churches who even mean really good things and they try to serve often feel like they leave those that they're serving feeling even worse about themselves, which is another reason why we're really bad at serving the poor. It's because we don't recognize these dynamics. So here's a table that we're going to throw up here on the screen. This just kind of lays out a bunch of different perspectives between wealthy people, middle-class people, and those in poverty, right? And this table has 15 different categories. We're just going to focus on 5. Because when you're teaching someone how to fish, you have to jump through all these extra hoops of how they view and process the world. Okay? So the first one, when it comes to money, the wealthy view money as something to be conserved and invested in, right? I guess there's no slides. So just pay attention to me really closely, okay? Really closely. Wealthy people view money as something to be invested to make even more money, right? Middle-class people view money as something to be managed, right? You budget it, you know exactly where it's all going, such like that. Those in poverty view money as a resource to be used and spent for the purpose of survival. Okay? Or even clothing. Wealthy people are all about clothing valued for its artistic sense and its expression, right? The designer is what's really important. Middle class tend to value clothing for the quality and acceptance into the norm of middle class, right? So your Lululemon brand is what's really important. For those in poverty, clothing is valued as an individual style and expression of your personality. It doesn't matter what brand it is, but it's them trying to uniquely express themselves. Or what about food? Wealthy people, the key question they ask when it comes to their food is it presented well? Does it look nice? For middle class people, the question for food is, did we like it? Did it taste good? Quality is important. For those in poverty, the key question for their food is, did you have enough? Quantity is important. When it comes to managing our time, wealthy people actually tend to view their time through the lens of traditions and history as the most important, right? So the decisions you make every day regarding the future is based off of your tradition, your decorum, what you've always done to maintain the legacy of the family, right? For middle class, when it comes to our time management, the future is the most important. We make decisions made against future ramifications. We look out a week, a month ahead in advance, right? I'm looking forward to my vacation in a month from now because I have the luxury to do that. Whereas those in poverty, the present is the most important because the decisions you make today are based off of how you're feeling and whatever is most important for survival. Lastly, when it comes to our views of destiny, where are we going? What's our purpose in this life? For those who are wealthy, it's all about maintaining prestigious rankings, right? Whatever you got to do to maintain where you're at. Those in middle class believe in choice. We can change the future with good choices now. We are in control of our destinies. Those in poverty believe in fate. You can't do much to mitigate choice. These are the cards that are handed to you, and that is that. You can't do anything. So in terms of giving a man a fish, we think of giving them food or money or shelter or clothes, right, for the day. But when it comes to teaching a man to fish, to live a life that can sustain themselves, you also have to go with an entirely new perspective of how they view their money, how they view their shelter, how they view how to live life beyond just today. And so we get caught in this dichotomy where we don't just want to give this person $5 to cover their food, right? Because we want to not just give them a Band-Aid fix, but then we also realize that in order for them to actually have a lifelong solution, we got to walk alongside them and get them to learn about how to not only spend whatever comes in for survival needs, but how to open up a savings account, how to find a job to maintain that for a long time, right? And to learn just simply a life perspective that the cards aren't stacked against you. You do have ability to change. Like, that's a lot harder. And so what we do is we don't do either. We don't give the man a fish because we want to provide long-term solutions, but the long-term solution is so much more difficult to do, so we just don't do anything. Ever felt that tension? That's at least my story. Maybe y'all are a lot better than I am with this. So what do we do then? What do we do? Because I still believe the church is the hope of the world. And I believe, and there's actually so many amazing stats of how religious people in churches are way more generous than average, right? We just get hung up in some different processes and things, right? That get in the way of how we can really be efficient. But like generally, broad speaking, the church does a good job. Most of the time. But what can we do instead when it comes to this dichotomy? And I think one of the things we got to do is to just not overcomplicate this entire issue. We get in our head about it, right? When it comes to serving the poor, as far as like a part of this being a part of the lost cause. So I would just want to suggest 2 simple ways for us to serve the poor. 2 simple things that we got to do. You can even write these down if you want to, okay? 2 things. 2 things. The first is to provide for daily needs. Provide for daily needs. Just do it. Give the man a fish. Okay, we've all been on street corners and we've seen the homeless people with their signs asking for money, or maybe we're personally just approached by someone who asks for some cash or for some food, and we get into that mind game. We say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash on me," because we don't carry cash anymore. But then as we walk away, we're also like, "Man, why don't they just get a job?" Right? Again, that is us projecting a middle-class norm of way of life that is just not normal for them. And actually when we do that, it's us puffing up our self-righteousness to make us feel better about the fact that we just ignored providing for their needs, And there's also the debate of like, even if we do give them the money, what are they going to do with it, right? Are they going to abuse it? Are they going to go spend it on drugs or something? Which is possible that they might, but it's also very possible that they might actually use that to do what they want it to do, right? And so in those moments, what if we just lean into the Spirit and just say, like, what's going to hurt? Why not extend compassion to this person? Or even if you don't have cash, one of the things you can do is you can buzz over to, like maybe there's a little restaurant right there, or maybe some takeout or something, and or maybe you can just like go to a gas station, just buy something there and bring it back to them. Something super tangible. That way you know exactly that you just provided for the need that they said that they wanted. There's no more guessing games. Like, God doesn't overcomplicate compassion. God doesn't complicate compassion. He tells us to feed the hungry, to quench the thirsty, to give to the poor, donate clothes to shelters or rummage places, maybe buy a bunch of food and bring it to the food pantry here in town or Charlie's Cupboard, right? Or we have a brand new Goodwill, right? You can donate a lot of stuff there that makes it a lot more affordable for people to get clothes here in town. There's so many things that we can do so simply that do provide for needs. Jesus told us that the poor will always be among us. And he equips us as his way of serving them. Just give the man a fish, because he does still need to eat today, right? So that's the first thing, provide for daily needs. The second is to participate in long-term solutions, okay? Participate in long-term solutions. So again, it's obviously better to address long-term solutions that can help lift people out of poverty, but these solutions are a lot more complex than what the average person can provide. So instead of just ignoring the problems because we're not the expert, we don't have a doctorate in social work or anything, we can participate in the long-term solutions alongside the experts, okay? So there are so many organizations you can volunteer with, you can give financially towards, that are experts in addressing these needs that are amazing. Like here in town, you can volunteer with the Community Connection Center and the Food Drive, right? A really easy way to help provide and work with this amazing nonprofit here in town that gives food to those who need it here. Or maybe you give financially to some other nonprofits that are just doing amazing work across the globe. Maybe you can't solve the fact that people don't have enough water across the globe, but you can give towards the creation of a well somewhere, right? Like there's so many ways of how we can participate in long-term solutions. Maybe you don't know how to end hunger, but you can help pack meals at Feeding South Dakota. Maybe you don't know how to address generational addiction, but you can be a foster family for a child while her parents get treatment. Maybe you don't know how to address, or provide just long-term housing solutions, but you can go on a mission trip with Casas por Cristo for a week that literally unlocks, just 3 days during that week to build a home can unlock a whole new realm of possibilities for a family, for generations to come. You can participate in these things for a short period of time that have a long-lasting impact, because I can guarantee you that the experts of these solutions are looking for volunteers to help them. In my dream for us as a church is for us to be the most outward-facing church that we can be in this city. Truly. And I don't think that's going to happen by us just doing more events where we have to organize all this stuff and invite you to come and help out and do it. That stuff is important, that helps. But what does it look like for us to cultivate in this culture, in this place where we just have this desire to serve those in need? And we are empowered to take these initiatives upon ourselves with our friends, our discipleship groups, our communities. We're dreaming about what that's going to look like. And just as I said a couple weeks ago, we're planning on a complete revamp of our discipleship efforts for this fall. This is coming right alongside it. Just dreaming about how we can continue to extend compassion to the city, into places beyond these walls. Because religious observance and social righteousness go hand in hand. We can invite our worship team back up here. And as we close, just this last little bit of worship, I want to read from what Jesus himself says in Matthew 25. We said that the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in person and go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. You did for me." There is some connection between these acts of generosity and service and compassion and literally serving Jesus himself. And what I think, if you've ever worked with those in poverty or have gone on a trip like with Casas por Cristo, what's amazing is you do actually come back feeling more ministered to than what you thought. Because you discover that those who live with less actually are a lot happier than you ever thought. They have a much more fruitful faith in Jesus because they have to rely on him in a way that us in our comfort don't have to. And they see his daily provision, literally giving them daily bread in a way that we just don't even think twice about. And perhaps one of the reasons why God tells us to his people in Isaiah and even here in the New Testament that serving the poor is a part of being blessed as his people, not just because that's a condition to reap, all the benefits that he wants to give us, but actually because we meet with God in a unique way when we are in these circles. Because he is uniquely present amongst the poor, providing for their needs, and what an amazing way for us to be exposed to his compassion that way too. It's a two-way street. Or serve too, even while we serve. So I don't know what this looks like for you, but my hope is that whether it's in our city, when you go back home this summer, if you hop on a trip with us, or if you take on another missions trip, or you just choose to donate financially, whatever it is, the Lord will call you blessed. Because we're meeting the needs of those who can't provide for themselves necessarily.